So go ahead and make yourself comfortable. You may have become uncomfortable. It happens. That first time that I was offered the opportunity to sit down, shut up, don't move, the bell didn't ring for about 50 minutes, 50. I had never sat like that before. My meditation that day was something along the lines of ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell. With many expletives peppering. And so, the good news is that we have this body that we can work with, that we can sort of use as our object of meditation. And the bad news is we have this body that, and this mind, all of this great material to work with. But it's not easy. And one of the things that Buddha discovered for himself was that was the first truth that he taught to people, which was that life contains suffering. Life is often unsatisfactory. Life has pain. And that pain is often transmuted to suffering. And so, it's an interesting practice, Dharma practice. There's a lot of, I've seen a lot of people run out the door, kind of like, well, what? We're not going to levitate, or we're not going to escape. We're not going to end pain for all time. No, we're not. We're going to see more deeply into capital R reality, see a little bit more deeply into things in a way that is perhaps has its metaphysical and mystical aspects, but it's also just very, very practical and related to the direct experience of what it's like to be a human being living in a body. So the title of the talk, Transforming the Poisons, and my inspiration for this talk, or this type of talk, was listening to a podcast. If you've ever heard Duncan Trussell, he's a comedian who grew up with a psychologist mother who hung out with people like Ram Dass and Jack Kornfield. So he kind of grew up with this sort of spiritual consciousness, and so he has a lot of spiritual guests. And he had Roshi Joan Halifax on. I might actually be even mixing up my podcast, but I'm pretty sure it was on Duncan's podcast. And Roshi Joan was talking about how at a certain point in her running her Sangha, she was taught by Roshi Bernie Glassman back in New York. And so she wanted to change one word of the four great vows, right? The four great vows are chanted over and over and over. There's a lot of chanting in Zen. And one of the chants of the four great vows, however innumerable all beings are, I vow to save them all, right? Which you can look at as an awesome, lofty goal, or an endless codependent slip when done incorrectly. But it's great. It's sort of if you're thinking about the horizon, right? Like, well, that's a nice horizon, right? I'm going to save all beings. However inexhaustible delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. Now, that's, again, might be lofty, but then if you read Buddha, the suttas, or you read Zen teachings and other teachings after the suttas or later suttas, they talk about that, right? They talk about enlightenment being, it's all gone. Like nirvana, it's like there's no more. No more greed, no more anger, no more delusion, no more rebirth, right? Then it's however immeasurable Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. And then however endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it. So that's one translation. Anyway, Roshi Joan wanted to change one word. And it was, however inexhaustible delusions are, I vow to transform them all. And Roshi Bernie Glassman's first reaction was, you can't do that. And she said, yes, I can. You empowered me. I don't know if that was the conversation. I just imagine, since she went forward with it, you told me, you transmitted the thing with the thing. So anyway, and that's what they chant. I think her place, I think it's called Upaya in New Mexico. You know, and I think other lineages and other teachers and other sanghas use that wording. And that, you know, especially when I think of my own arc of what I've experienced by in practicing Dharma, that feels more like the experience. You know, it feels like transformation. You know, a lot of my Zen training was very, you know, it's happening now. As a matter of fact, when I said now, that was too late because it happened there, right? And that enlightenment is available right here, right now, and we're talking about extinguishing things. And at the same time, it was almost kind of like there was a little bit of not a shell game or trickery, but, you know, like if you would answer a koan, or you would have an experience and the teacher would validate it, and then they would say, okay, now here's the tester koan, or here's the next practice. What do you mean next practice? You just said that which is a wonderful, actually I have one really good story about that, where I came into my teacher, he said, you have answered this koan. I'm now going to give you tester koans. And I was like, really? And so he gives me this tester koan, I go out, I sit with it for a day, I come back and I'm like, I have the answer. And I go, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, nope. And it was interesting. I was like deep in retreat, and my ego came up like more strongly than I think I've ever seen in my life. Like literally, I think I yelled at him. I was like, "What do you mean?" You know, like truly enlightened being. And he had this huge grin on his face. And those of you who are familiar or not familiar with Zen, those kind of interviews, he has a little bell. You know, which when he rings it means like, get out of my office. And he just gave me a big smile. It's like, oh, yeah, you're the Zen master. I'm still working on this project. So anyway, so anytime that I feel like I'm at that point, like blammo, what I realize is that I'm at a point that is just part of my transformation. That is part of the transformation of greed, anger, and delusion, or a transformation involving a deeper understanding, or a deeper relationship, or a deeper, hopefully direct experience of impermanence, right? The three marks, three characteristics of existence: impermanence, suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, and not self, or the lack of a concrete self for me to land on, which of course is that's where Buddhism collapses into stoner talk. It's a sort of, it's usually not, I don't know, I've met some people that's the primary door that they walked through to sort of come to their understanding, but I don't know, anyway. As a therapist, I have a hard time with leading someone through the door of emptiness. Go ahead, fall into the great void. I'll be here when you come out, if you come out. Doesn't work. So, anyway. So that the Roshi Joan talking about transformation inspired me to look at, and I think that's an inspiration then for me to kind of backtrack and look at, like, wow, like, what do we do? What do we do when we're doing yoga? What do we do when we're sitting meditation? What do we do when we're in therapy? What do we do when we're in our lives and trying to like be with people at something deeper than small talk, right? Like, what's happening? in those spaces. And I feel what's happening in those spaces, if I go by the sort of the impermanence door, the impermanence sort of background, that is constant transformation. Okay? So then, going from the suffering background, then what is it that I want to truly transform? I want, suffering. I mean, I don't want suffering. So, so how do I transform suffering? And that kicks me back to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which on many levels and in many of the teachings through the millennia reference greed, anger, and delusion, the three poisons, as being the roots and where craving and clinging live. So what do I need to transform? I need to transform suffering. Okay, I need to transform craving and clinging. What's at the root of that craving and clinging? Greed, anger, and delusion. Let's go to the root. Let's transform those. Those are understandable. So just by way of framing it and like review, and or if you're not familiar or framing it, Four Noble Truths, when Buddha had his experience, and by the way, thinking of it this way too, transformation, right? Buddha did not sit under the Bodhi tree like in a vacuum and like 7 days later have beginner's luck. He lived as a prince for almost 30 years, and then went on his search, and that search was 7 years long. 7 years of seeking the wisdom of teachers all over India, like all the best people. And each time he would get to the place eventually where they're like, that's all I got. And he's like, no, that's not it. And I got to go to the next person. And then by the time he was close to his enlightenment, he was at the place where he was practicing very ascetic practices. You could see his rib cage, he's like got fingernails like Howard Hughes, and the hair is scraggly, and he's eating 1 grain of rice a day. And so it's going all the way, hitting the needle all the way in the opposite direction, right? I'm a prince, and I get everything and anything I want. Just lots of food, lots of sex, lots of fun. And then I'm like 1 grain of rice a day. And it was an experience that he had where he's like, wait a second, this isn't right. There must be a middle path. And that's when he went down to sit down. He's like, I'm going to sit down. I'm not getting up till I figure this out. And so what he figured out, or what he came to, was this middle path. And when he wanted to describe it to people, he was completely flummoxed. And at first he didn't even want to teach it. He's like, no one's going to understand this. And he was encouraged by a couple of people to teach it. He said, people have too much dust in their eyes. And someone said, well, what about the people with just a little less dust in their eyes? And so he gave it his best shot, and at first, actually, I think he had a couple of really bad gigs, where it didn't land. He tried to explain it, and they're like, what? And then he went to the medicine of the time, Ayurvedic medicine. And the Four Noble Truths are built on Ayurvedic medicine. The great psychologist. Diagnosis, what are the symptoms and causes? What's the cure? And what's the prescription? Right? So life is suffering, or life contains suffering. Brilliant. Absolutely. Sometimes I have this fantasy of sitting at the foot of the Buddha and going, duh. And him saying, Second one is brilliant too, right? It's the cause of it is craving and clinging and attachment and aversion. It's like, wow, yeah. I want. I don't want. I'm suffering. Right? Pain is guaranteed. Actually, I was going to use my body as an example, but I'm actually quite comfortable right now. Usually got something going on, you know. Oh, I'm 53, right about here. But, you know. When we were sitting, at one moment I was like, I really want a sip of this iced coffee. I was suffering for that moment. Right? There's the top shelf suffering, right? You know, sickness, old age, death. And then there's like moment to moment. Right? I crave. I don't have. I want. I don't like. I drank too much. I'm nervous. Suffering. And so what's the cure? The cure it's simple. It's not surgery, but it is if you end craving and clinging, you can end suffering. And so then the prescription was, we're not going to go in and cut out the pain or cut out the thoughts, the thinking mind. We're not going to do anything like that. We're going to follow this Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path has all the elements of really sound psychology, 2,600 years before MRIs and fMRIs and all the rest of it. And it also has a very, very, I find, very simple, direct, and lovely way of saying that if you live ethically, you'll probably feel better. You won't suffer as much, or you won't suffer. And I find that a lot of the transformational nature of this is in the ethical factors, right? There's 8 factors. The first 2 are wisdom factors of a right understanding and right intention, right? So like I get a little bit wiser, and then I set my intention off of that, like just enough wisdom to know that this is a good idea, and then I set the intention, okay, I'm going to practice, or I'm going to follow this path. And then the ethical factors, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Which in New York terms is sometimes translated as, don't say dumb shit, don't do dumb shit, and don't be an asshole. My inner Brooklynite understands it better than and it's also the ethical factors. He wrote a prescription. He didn't write commandments, right? And so the basic premise is that I can have a transformative experience that includes mistakes or falling off the path. That I can realize that I've done harm to myself or others in some way, and then I can see the karma that has created. And then, as my Zen teacher used to say often, he said, you can change your karma at any time. Karma's cause and effect, right? So if I, do something differently today than I did yesterday, and it's no longer doing harm, we're on our way. There's no need to get the wet noodle. Except where, sometimes that's helpful, right? And then the last 3 factors, the mindfulness factors, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So that's where Buddha sort of draws his line in the spiritual sand and says, 3/8 of this is meditation. Right? That meditation is going to be key to the development of all these. But he was also saying that ethical living is going to be key to the development of all these things. And a constant sort of, or at least a dedicated effort to try and be in wisdom rather than delusion is going to be important. So greed and anger, right? People, I can engage in greedy speech, greedy action, greedy livelihood. And there's so many levels of it, just like with the levels of suffering, the Starbucks levels of suffering, right? I can be greedy in my speech. I can ask something of someone that it's not necessarily like I'm trying to take some big ticket item off of them, but I could be trying to take what is not being freely given. One can get very persnickety about all this. But in a sense, all I'm doing when I'm doing that is applying mindfulness and concentration to this dilemma of how to live in the world and amongst people and other beings. So, how do I transform greed? I can transform greed by being generous. Right? Generosity is a great deal of the antidote to that. How can I be generous? To go New Age on it, and this is a vague memory, and so I might be inventing it, but I read like the first 5 pages of a book by Deepak Chopra, and the first page it said if you go to someone's house, always bring something, right? And that's in etiquette books too, but he said bring something, even if it's just a flower, or if not a flower, a loving thought, right? So there's different levels, right? Am I being generous with my heart practice, with my metta, wherever I go, whether it be my words, whether it be actions that I'm taking, whether it be what I do at work. I mean, if I wanted to go into sort of beating myself up and saying that I'm greedy, and taking, or where's the line drawn, right? Like I drive a Prius because I live in LA and it's the law. It's a black Prius. I just passed 200,000 miles on that thing. All mine.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I got the most out of that car so far. It still uses gas, right? I had this client once who was kind of yelling at me that his what are those cars that no longer exist? The big kind of tanks, Hummers, right? He was saying that the Hummer actually is more, when you figure in like the airplaning in of the parts of the Prius, but he had this math where his Hummer was actually friendlier to the environment than mine. Anyway, I don't know if he's right, but you get where I'm going with this, right? Like who made this shirt for me? Was this a child in China, right? I'm not perfect with this. I haven't been vegan in many years, right? So, where are the lines and where am I going? And what are my goals? That horizon thing is very important, I think, right? And then with anger, I've been doing anger management groups with people for over 20 years. I accidentally landed it, right? I was one of those people who I never ever got angry, right? Anyone here people like, right? I never get angry. That's impossible. That was just the math on that. So, but I was one of those people who would never get angry until and unless I was in an alcohol blackout, right? So when I got sober, I was like, I never get angry, right? And then this guy comes up to me, literally at an AA meeting. I'm sitting there just like this, not cross-legged, but just kind of relaxed. And he goes, "I want to be your friend." I think people do that in AA meetings. I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Because you're the only person in this room who's angrier than I am." And then he goes, and his nickname, in AA people don't have last names. He's like, his nickname on both coasts, he was a bi-coastal guy, was Angry Andy. So Angry Andy called me out as the angriest guy. It was like a 200-person meeting. So I decided to look at this. I started to look at it. And then like the next year, I became a high school teacher in Brooklyn. If you want to discover your anger issues, do that. And I got this job, and then that wasn't enough. Then I was in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and the Crown Heights riots happened the summer after my first year teaching. And so I was angry, the kids were angry, everybody's angry and upset. And I end up in this sort of helping in the healing process while I'm in the midst of my own anger management sort of dilemma. And then I've been doing anger management ever since. And so it's interesting for me because every now and then, like when I do anger management in a group setting, I'll do the 0 to 10 continuum and ask everyone in the room, and I always participate. I'll say, and a lot of times they I tell them I'm at a 0 right now, and they're like, no, you're not. 0 doesn't exist. I'm like, well, just keep doing this, and maybe it will. It's not required. Not everybody gets to 0, right? I give them a lot of leeway around the 0. Like 0 is like if someone hucked a loogie at you, you'd still be okay, right? So it's a very rare thing, right? Anyway, point being is like every now and then, like it'll get to me in the check-in, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm at a 4. Talked to my dad this morning, we kind of got into it, So like, it's not about the extinguishment of it. For me, it's about this transformation of I have this very deep mindful awareness of the fact that I'm at a 4, which allows me to then apply wisdom and intention and know that the ethical factors are telling me it might be a good idea not to act out on that and do harm. And then I can apply the mindfulness and concentration. So instead of denying that I am a human being sitting on the ground with feelings, I am quite aware of it. And that's what this practice offers. And that's how the transformation seems to happen. And then delusion, so anger, goodwill, kindness, loving kindness, all of the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity are all wonderful sort of things that I apply, and we can apply to one's anger in order to help in its transformation. And then delusion, it's the development of wisdom. And I have found that there are many paths to that. I found mine, or I found the one that I've chosen to follow all this time, and I don't have any immediate plans to change it. And it's multifaceted, and it's got a lot of elements. I went to interfaith ministry school for a while. I dropped out. That's actually how Josh Corder and I sort of rekindled our friendship. Was he came to me, he said, I heard you went to interfaith ministry school. You have to marry me and Kathy. And I said, I dropped out. And he said, figure it out. And I did, you point and click ordination. Do I have to pay taxes anymore? Can I park wherever I want? So delusion, the antidote, is wisdom, is the intention to live in a way that promotes more wisdom. I'll start to wrap it up. I leave a good amount of time for some question and answer if you like. One of the things that's on my mind, somewhat because I went to Against the Stream on Wednesday and Noah was talking, and Noah talked about the 5 faculties. Buddha made a lot of lists. Buddha's very friendly to the ADD people. There's this. Anyone ever read the book Delivered from Distraction? If you're ADD or have a family member, friend is ADD, he's his Harvard psychiatrist, one of the foremost experts on ADD, Ned Hallowell, and the first chapter he writes, he goes, Hello, Mr. or Miss ADD person. I've put everything you need to know in the first chapter because I know you're not going to read the rest of the book. And I've used a lot of bullet points because I know you love those too. So, and he's totally ADD also, self-admitted.
What is the name of that?
What's that?
Again? The name? Again?
Delivered from Distraction. The Driven to Distraction was the first book, and that was about ADHD, childhood ADHD diagnosis. And then Delivered from Distraction is about, if you're interested in it, is in adult ADD and recovery from that. And I'll give you the bullet point, which is he said that the ADD person needs two things: the right relationship and the right job. They can flourish with those two things, right? So it has to be someone who's like a fellow ADD and you just like bounce around the room together, or someone who can tolerate that. And then the right job. If you're familiar with some of the stories out there, people, very successful people who have ADD. The most famous one is the owner of JetBlue. Very famous for being ADD and very famous for realizing that as long as I don't have to do any paperwork or anything else that makes me drool out of the left side of my mouth, I'm going to run a huge, beautiful airline. And so learning how to delegate, learning how to step out and use actually some of the gifts that come with that way of thinking. But I digress in an ADD fashion. Where was I? Oh, yes, the 5 faculties. And the faculty made a lot of lists. So when Buddha tried to explain, he was trying to think, how did I get to that direct experience that resulted in what it is that I tried to teach through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, right? Like, what were the steps that I took? And usually a lot of Buddha's lists are more, they're not like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Sometimes they are. But this one is kind of like that. He said, first I had confidence / faith, right? Not faith in a higher power or God or anything like that. Faith that I can do this, right? And then, second, was effort. I can have all the great thoughts that I want or all the great confidence that I have, but if I don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. And then mindfulness, then concentration, and then wisdom, right? And so which brings him / us to the first factor of the Eightfold Path, right? That those were he was wondering, how did I get from like a prince who didn't know anything about anything to this guy who sat down under the tree and on the 8th morning saw the morning star and had the mind-blown experience. So, how to get out of delusion, how to practice, right? So having the confidence, part of that is found in this jewel of the 3 jewels, that of Sangha, right? Being around other spiritual friends who are on the same path, or a similar path, and that we're energizing each other and giving, and it's like, you think we can do this? Yeah, we can do, yeah, let's do this, right? And then the effort, we sat down, we shut up, we didn't move for 15 minutes. We're participating in this Dharma talk together. And then, and again, this is where Buddha is Buddha, right? Mindfulness. His big realization that was different than a lot of the Hindu teachers at the time and the other spiritual teachers of the time was they were turning away from this experience in order to find some otherworldly experience. Buddha said, no, turn in towards the pain, towards the experience. That's where it's going to happen. And then you develop a concentration in order to do that and promote it. And then the wisdom grows. So, and through that, delusion is transformed into greater wisdom. And in the spirit of transformation, let's not promise ourselves or beat ourselves silly if we are not able to extinguish greed, anger, delusion. Each day, each moment, I can, a little bit at a time, transform greed and or anger and or delusion. Moment by moment. There's only one moment, and it's this one. It's true. All the rest is mind stuff. How's my kid doing on her play date? What am I going to do at work tomorrow? Nope. I mean, that's happening, but it's over there. It's not happening. So, anyway, my hope is that any of that was helpful in any kind of way. And then leaving 20 minutes or so for question and answer. And I invite you to ask anything you want.
Can I just say real quick, it's funny because for the people that sit with me all the time, I have an obsession with Starbucks. So, and I always integrate Starbucks into the talk. And so now with you, they have to think it's a Dharma teacher.
It's a Dharma teaching.
It's a Dharma teacher thing.
Yep.
We're both like, yes, suffering, yes. And no, we don't have stock in Starbucks.
Support your independent coffee.
Yes, please.
Where are they?
Is there one here?
There's one right in the corner. It's a mom and pop. They just.
I always come there and it's always been closed. I go there all the time. I'm wondering what are the hours? Saturday morning I go there, it's closed. Like,
Google it.
Sunday I go, it's not.
So I think just kind of asking questions. You know, don't be afraid to ask. I know it can be intimidating to be the first one to do it. I think, you know, for me coming, what I got from the talk was, you know, the whole practice is to be in wisdom and to live in this unfiltered awareness. And to live in an unfiltered awareness and be in wisdom, we must be in practice with one another. And so being in community, and it always brings me back to this story of, you know, Ananda and Buddha, and Ananda asking the Buddha, you know, is the Sangha not half the practice? And the Buddha replies back to him, no, Ananda, it is not so. It is the whole of the practice. So for us to, you know, we're always alone but together in our meditation practice and within our everyday moment-to-moment experience. But the whole point of doing this practice is to live a more compassionate life with one another. Because what would the practice be if it wasn't that we can share it with one another? And the ultimate goal, I do believe, and especially for myself in this practice, always comes back to, how may I help you? And if I'm not in complete wisdom and coming from a compassionate heart and living in my moment-to-moment experience, I can't really ask that. I can't really ask you, how may I help you? And I think that's the one thing that is missing in a lot of our lives is, when is the last time that somebody asked you that and really meant it and sat there and listened to you and experienced what you were feeling and what you were trying to say and that moment awareness with you? And when is the last time that you were able to give that to somebody else? I think, you know, we are very primal beings. We are pack people. Relationships are the only way that we survive and thrive. And if we can't be in proper relationship with oneself, we obviously cannot be in proper relationship with other people. So how can we ever find the happiness that everyone is seeking for? It sounds so complicated, and this is what the Buddha said in the very beginning, you know, that he didn't want to go out and teach us because nobody would ever believe him. It's too simple. You know, because we complicate everything. And there's such beautiful simplicity to these teachings and to just sitting down and shutting up and paying attention. And it's so hard, and because we're taught that it has to be complicated. If it's not complicated, it doesn't work. So there's beauty in the simplicity. So I think just all of us being together in community and sitting with one another, I mean, this is we are in practice right now. We are meditating right now. This is the most beautiful form of practice that we could ever do. So thank you for that. Thank you.
And I have a question.
There you go. Good.
Whoa.
Yeah.
All the same time.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Have you written any books?
So I am sort of cresting this wave with that. For a long time I was much more concerned with my clinical practice and things like that. So I'm done with one book and just about done with the second one. And the first one hasn't been published yet. And then I'm now just got a small deal to co-write with my colleague a book on mindfulness and EMDR as a new paradigm for trauma-informed treatment. So that's the answer. And I actually hope to have. I'm just going to go ahead and self-publish the first two because I just want to share them.
Is it both related topics?
So the first one actually, I had to get this out of my system. I've been a 12-step practitioner for the last 27 years, and I've just watched all these sort of this sort of endless sort of people sort of either not. It's not the problem of it being people bashing it or anything like that. It's more just sort of that's not what they said 80 years ago. So I kind of wanted to just give my personal and professional sort of meditation upon them, and just and then sort of coffee talk. Here, discuss. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Anyway, so there's that, and then the other one's called Clinical Dharma, which are a series of retreats and classes that I'm actually going to be offering online, hopefully within the next couple of months. That is for people in the helping professions to be able to access the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, in order to take better care of themselves and also take better care of, and therefore take better care of others. And so it's obviously it's pointed towards people in the helping professions, which kind of covers a lot of ground. And it's also so far it's been of interest to people who just find themselves in a position of wanting to help. So those two, and then
Thank you.
Just commenting on the notion of impermanence, non-self really grabbed me. But when we talk about then of those five faculties, the wisdom, that's impermanent too, isn't it? I mean, it's a complete process. Is there, I think maybe it's my Western brain that wants to put it out there. Got it finally, but so the Eightfold Path, which I need to study a lot more, would be transforming the experiences that you get on the cushion or that you feel in your everyday life, moment to moment, whatever, and then trying to apply right action, right speech. So there's an element of reflection happening during the meditation too, not just a focus on the breath and stillness, but am I right?
So it's interesting that you bring that question up, because we were having our discussion about our Zen training and insight and different, not even just different traditions, but different teachers within traditions will say, for instance, that the ethics lead you to the deeper mindfulness. That's first and then that. And then other teachers will say it's the mindfulness and concentration, and through that development of that internal wisdom, that will grow your ethical compass. In other words, going back to your original sort of comment about, isn't the wisdom impermanent, right? Since the wisdom is that there is impermanence, it's awesome. It's like this. It's a song that never ends. Right? So, I see a great deal of of truth to that. And then it's sort of like, yes, the Eightfold Path, it's like, but it's more like,
Thank you.
thank you.
Could you repeat the balance of the greed, anger, and delusion? I think I got them all except for the anger. I didn't.
Oh, like the antidote?
Yeah.
So greed, generosity, anger, goodwill. I fleshed it out, and I think it pertains to the four Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. Appreciative joy being the one, I like to always think of that as the one that's lacking in Hollywood, like people, oh, I'm so glad you got that part, I didn't get it, like that happened. And for a lot of people, my experience has been over time, just in therapy context and also Dharma context, that one is really tricky for people.
Because of jealousy.
Yeah. Like, I'm so happy for you.
So I'm an urban high school teacher, and sometimes I get overwhelmed. Actually, I suffer a lot from being overwhelmed with trying to help everyone, and there's so many needs among teens, and it's just, and then I have 2 teens, and I'm a single father. So, even yesterday I was teaching my son to drive the stick shift, right? And even though I was trying to meditate while I was doing that, right, I got out of the back car, and my back was just a knot. I had to lay down. I physically could not get in a place where my muscle was spasming. So, and I'm pretty good at it most of the time. But, for me, I'm trying to develop those boundaries and things like that, but you sort of spoke to it in several different ways. So I'm just curious, plus you have the inner city teaching background too.
So my initial response is that of greed, right? The greed is I want to help everybody.
That's true.
Like a lot. That's the thing, is that sometimes the greed or the anger, like all of it, like justifiable anger, this deep desire to. That's kind of almost what I was talking about with the, there's the really good goal, and then there's the endless codependent slip, and it's so hard to balance, right? It's actually, this is kind of the whole theme of this clinical Dharma that I've been doing, which is that I need to put the oxygen mask on myself first before helping others in the cabin, right? And so how do I do that? As I apply everything that I see in the teachings to myself first, right? That I need to have loving kindness towards myself. I need to have compassion for myself. I need to even have, I guess, appreciative joy towards myself, right? So it's not like a perfect science formula where it's a panacea and then we're good. But it is sort of a framework that helps in dealing with, that which is so stressful. Like when you added 2 teenagers to the teenagers you're teaching, I was like, my mind was, I was like, dude.
And I never get mad.
Is it okay? I'll tell the story about how my last burst of anger has it, right? But in the context of the teaching, since you're asking about that. So I taught in a school, and I before I was all this, I was a punk rock drummer, and so I still wore steel toe boots everywhere, and so I was teaching these steel toe boots. Anyway, me and my therapist will talk about it again next week. So anyway, so I'm teaching, and they're doing the thing, where they're being teenagers, and I'm getting angry. and I'm pacing back and forth, but in a way that makes me look like I'm just thinking. And then I realized, wow, I've got steel-toe boots on. They can't see. The desk is kind of covering sort of most of my body, so if I just moved my knee a little bit and kind of kicked with the steel-toe boot the file cabinet, it's going to make a great sound. So, and I'm like, I'm, what am I, like a couple of years sober, a couple of years of the Dharma practice at this point. I'm like, don't do it. And then it's like, we're doing it. And I did it. And it sounded like a freaking bomb or something. It's like ridiculous. And like I saw 34 children, right, go up in the air. Literally. Scared the fuck out, right? So my first response was, awesome! That was amazing! Then I stopped for a second. I came out of my reverie, and I look, and there's like 34 terrified children, right? And I'm like, not as awesome as I originally thought. And then, being especially like someone who is in a practice already where like compassion and loving kindness are kind of like the code words, and I was in recovery where you're like, anger is what's going to help you relapse or whatever, I went into complete shame and horror and guilt and hating myself. I went to an AA meeting that night and I just cried through the whole meeting, like, I am scum of the earth. So there's no transformation allowed. I've just, I've committed the crime of the century, right? So, just not for nothing, I did that same exact act 2 more times, right? The second time, as I was going back and forth, I was like, don't do it. And now we got to the point where, as my leg was moving, I was still saying, don't do it, right? Like the addict did, right? And then I did it, and as the bodies were going in the air, again, I was like, oh, not so awesome, right? Like I got more quickly to that, did more of the wet noodle over the back. Third time I did it, I hated myself from the beginning of it to the end of it. Like I was like, don't do it. I'm going to be doing this, and I can't believe I'm doing it. And I did it. And I never did that again. So the transformation of the anger I have found it's not going to look pretty. But it can happen over a shorter period of time with less damage done if I have safe people and safe places and safe kind of practices to help me to go through it. And Sangha helps. Like when I do anger management, 99% of the time I'm doing it in a group setting because people need a lot of support to be able to handle this unwieldy and often very destructive emotion.
I got a question. Kids change after the third time?
Was it the same kid?
So they revolted. I changed and they changed. I mean, I went through quite an experience. I taught there for 3 years, and the reason I left the school system was I went on this cross-country trip after my 3rd year, and I did The Artist's Way, that book with Julia Cameron, and I came out and like, I gotta give the rock and roll one more chance. And so that's what that was. But during that 3 years, after the Crown Heights riots, I got trained by all these nonprofits, and then a bunch of us were pulled into a room for the summer, and we rewrote the violence prevention, conflict resolution, diversity appreciation, prejudice reduction curriculum for New York City public schools. And some of it's still in place. And then I started to work for those nonprofits that trained me. I was like, is this your job? They're like, yeah, I work here. I was like, how do I get that job? So that was besides the rock and roll, I also did that.
And you dispose of your hard-toe boots too?
Yeah, steel-toe boots, no. I actually got rid of them when the leather just completely came off the toe, revealing like this rusted steel thing, and it just looked bad. and the steel-toe boots gave me comfort. I didn't, except for the file cabinets, I didn't really use it for anything like that. And the point being that the kids that I work with, a lot of them, what that was a Sangha thing. We ended up working together. I mean, the main thrust of the work that we did was creating a huge network of peer educators. So I can't say that every one of those kids kind of got real. I'll tell one last story in this regard, and then we have to wrap it up. There was this one student who, just the message never really got through. Anyway, so there was this huge fight in the cafeteria. And by this time, New York City public schools had trained one person to be a mediation person and one person to be a negotiation person. It was wonderful. They sent us to Columbia University, International Conflict Resolution Center. We got trained by Columbia. And so I was the mediation person, there's other guys in the negotiation person. So we took the two main perpetrators in the big fight and took them to separate parts of the building and calmed them down, and then we're bringing everything back together. And then this other student who I'd had in one of my classes before was following us and trying to instigate them, get them instigated again. And so finally I just turned around and I said, please, it took a lot of work to get here, so please if you could stop. And she said, fuck you, Mr. D, which is what people call me. Not fuck you, they call me. Well, I don't know, some of them might. Anyway, and it came out of me, I swear, it came out of me just like this. I said, fuck you! I take great pride that's the only time that ever happened. And she was, and she, as she utilized her student privilege at that time, which was like, you are not allowed to say that. She's like, and I was like, whatever, whoa, right? And I'm going through the whole thing like, oh, that's it, I'm gonna be in the newspaper. Time to go to school again. Anyway, the long and the short of it was that we went back into this room and I sat down, and by this time my practice was solid enough where I just said, I am so sorry. There's no reason at any time for me to say that. And literally, this happened to me a few times during this part of that process, was she couldn't form words because no one had ever apologized for it, like that. And at least this particular person. So anyway, so it's like this ongoing presentation of the koans and the situations that we have to deal with on a moment-to-moment basis. And then if I just sort of be meditative about tracking my progress or my regression, I can then plan the next ops.
If that happens to you again, knowing now, what would you do? What would be your answer when you are completely on whatever you're doing and somebody comes and attacks you because they're reacting to their history or whatever? What would you do now?
So it depends. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the day. Like how did I wake up that morning? In other words, I feel like I'm a lot better than I used to be, and so therefore there's a good chance that I won't say fuck you. Right, in that situation, like a similar situation to that. And then I would just, a lot of it has to do too with, I had this other situation where I ran a program for young people who committed hate crimes in New York City. And they came to me instead of going to juvie. And, one of them was the real deal, 6'4", tattoos, I hate all people who are not me, the whole thing. And there was no security, no anything. I was afraid. And he came in and he said, the first thing he said was, I said hi, and he said, I hate the fucking Jews. Do you have a problem with that? My first internal reaction, this is a good way to back up. My first internal reaction at that time was, how far would this kid go if I drop kicked him right now? I had this human reaction, that's awful. Second one, and this is my go-to for my training as a kid, is sarcasm. In my mind, I was like, oh, we don't like the Jews. Third reaction was from the practice, which was, I said, well, why? And then he said, the judge was a Jew, the jury was Jewish, the DA is a Jew, my lawyer was Jewish, this building is Jewish, it was. He's like, you're probably Jewish, you're totally scoring high on this exam. So my first, is this okay? No. So my first reaction internally was, how far would this go if I drop kicked? Right? Like, and again, like that's my amygdala talking. Like, and it's not words, it's just like, fight or flight. Second reaction is, whoa, that's a lot of Jews. Right? I say that doesn't help either. You know what I mean? Like my first and my second reactions, my first and second responses are generally not probably in that kind of situation. They're not good. And then the third one was, and this is like intergalactic as far as I'm concerned, considering my experiences growing up and everything. I said, I can understand how you might end up not liking people that are of that description. And that was one of those other ones where he's like, what do you say to that? And then I just said, look, you don't even have to like Jewish people at the end of this. You just have to show up all 10 weeks, and we'll see what happens when you're done. So anyway, so that's a little bit of a description. Is like I'm very much a human being with like a limbic system and a reptilian brain that has reactions and responses. And now what I've done through the practice, through the Eightfold Path, so there's the ethical part, and then there's the mindfulness and the concentration, which allows me to pause. And not just pause for the sake of creating some time lapse, but pause to create like a space from which to acknowledge the possibility of how loving kindness, compassion, can be acted out in the situation. So that was a little bit of an extended dance mix answer.
Well, thank you so much. And just a couple of things before we go. I would like to sing our ending sloka, a prayer to thank Steve today. And then if we could take a quick picture so that we can post it. Thank him for coming today. And then also, too, this is a donation-based sitting. So anything that you can, please give. It does help us sustain our work and pay the rent. So we do appreciate it. So in the prayer, the ending sloka, it is in Sanskrit. So just follow along. It's a call and response. It's pretty quick and easy. It means, may we all be happy. May we all live free from disease and disabilities. May we all look to the good of others. And may no one ever live in sorrow. All together. Sarve bhavantu sukhanaha. Sarve bhavantu sukhanaha. Sarve santu niramaya. Sarve santu niramaya. Sarve bhatrani bhashantu. Sarve bhatrani bhashantu. Ma kashet dukhabhag bhave. Ma kashet dukhabhag bhave. Together we go. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hands behind your back, fold forward. Thank you so much. Thank you.